Good afternoon. Welcome to St. Peter's Hove. I'm Father Alexander, and here we go again, our second journey into the hinterland of the book of Deuteronomy. Now, as I said, the book of Deuteronomy is presented as a series of speeches by Moses. I'd just like to look at the first speech of Moses, the first discourse of Moses, which is from Deuteronomy 1:1 to Deuteronomy 4:43. If you've got a Jerusalem Bible, it very helpfully divides it all up for you, so it's got subheadings and so on. Now, in this speech, what does Moses do? He tells the people of Israel what they already know. He summarizes the journey so far. He summarizes what their experiences in the desert, the giving of the law, and so on. In other words, it's what's called recapitulation. It's the same story that's been told in Exodus and in Numbers, but it's homogenized, if you like, represented, re-edited by the Deuteronomist. So it's beautifully told. So if you want really to understand what went on in the desert, these first 4 chapters give you a lovely summary. The real sort of killer quotes, which I'd like to home in on, are what happens not to Zion, the king of the Amorites, or Og, the king of Bashan, but rather what Moses says to the people where he passes on the message of God. This is the beginning of chapter 4. He says, "And now, Israel, listen to the laws and customs which I am teaching you today, so that by observing them you may survive to enter and take possession of the country which Yahweh, God of your ancestors, is giving you. You must add nothing to what I command you and take nothing from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God, just as I lay them down for you." So we have laws and customs. Why the two? Well, the laws are 10 commandments and things like that. The customs are, if you like, the laws about the laws that protect the approach to the laws. In other words, we have a law, let's say, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Then we have the customs associated with the law about how not to break that law. So all the customs about how to cook your food the night before and things like that. And he says, "These I am teaching you today so that by observing them, you may survive to enter and take possession of the country which I am giving you." Now, 2 things are important here. First of all, your retention of the country I'm giving you, the promised land, is dependent on your keeping the law. In other words, if you stop keeping the law, you will lose the promised land. You'll be thrown out of the promised land. And so it came to pass with the exile. In fact, the recurrent exiles of the people of Israel. The other thing is this, so that you may survive. In other words, the keeping of the law and customs is an existential matter. The life of Israel as a people, as a community, their identity depends on their keeping the law. If you don't keep this law, you will cease to be Jewish. You will just wander off and join the peoples. You'll become Gentiles. You'll be homogenized. You'll be assimilated into the people around you. You will cease to exist as Jewish people. The law is what keeps you Jewish. The law is what keeps you a child of Israel. The law is what keeps you a person who is a member of the community of God, of the family of God. And then he says, of course, an admonition against reform of the law. Now, reform, what's reform mean? It means reform. You form it again. In other words, you chop it up and then you put it back together again in a different way. You must add nothing to what I command you, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God, just as I lay them down for you. In other words, this law is irreformable. This law is definitive. This law is complete. You don't need to add anything onto it. Now, it's here at this point that we Catholics have something to say. Well, first of all, we believe, and let's remember this, that the law is important. And if you break the law of God, the moral law of God, you can't really claim to be a Catholic anymore. If you break the 10 commandments, the important commandments of God, the most important commandments of God, you set yourself outside the community of the church. Mortal sin deprives you of the life of God. So if you like, if you commit mortal sin, you'll be still a member of the family of God, but you're a member of the family of God who's run away from home. So that's important. And you need to come back and be reconciled. A bit like the prodigal son, you may remember. The prodigal son could not claim, when he was sitting in the pigsty, to be his father's son. In fact, he didn't dare. When he came back, he said, call me one of your servants, make me one of your servants. I do not deserve to be called your son. So we believe this very strongly. The keeping of the law is linked to our existence as Catholics. If we stop keeping the law, we cease to be Catholics. Now, obviously, and the law of Deuteronomy generated a vast corpus of commentary and commentaries on the commentaries and commentaries on the commentaries on the commentaries. Not every infringement of the law breaks your membership or destroys your membership of the chosen people. If you go off and worship an idol, if you go off and worship Baal, yes, you're apostatizing. The golden calf, that's apostasy. But something like, for example, I don't know, doing something very minor on the Sabbath, which counts as work, would not throw you out of the people of Israel. And we too know that not all laws are of the same weight. We do know that. We do know that. That's something, incidentally, that our Protestant brethren deny. Strict Protestants, they say all law breaking breaks your relationship with God. We just say mortal sin breaks your relationship with God. Venial sin merely damages your relationship with God. But what about this about the law being irreformable? Well, yes, the law is irreformable. However, the formulations of the law, we have to say, are not irreformable. What do I mean by this? Well, thou shalt not kill is a law that's never going to go away. It is given to us by God, and it's not something we made up ourselves. It's been given to us by God, and it's never going to go out of date. Thou shalt not commit adultery. It's never going to go out of date. However, there are certain interpretations and formulations about the laws to do with murder, the laws to do with taking human life, which, of course, do change. So, for example, you may have heard that people were hanged in the Middle Ages for killing people when they didn't mean to kill people. So if you threw a pair of tongs at a cow's head and it bounced off and hit your wife, and the wife died, then you'd be hanged for murder. Well, you wouldn't be nowadays. You would actually be punished for manslaughter. You would get quite a light sentence, I would imagine. The formulation of the law, what constitutes murder, how guilt is to be determined, that does change. That should be subject to reform. But the law in itself cannot change. The formulations of the law can change. St. Thomas Aquinas wisely said, not every law can foresee all circumstances, so the law has to be constantly updated. So, for example, the law of killing has always been, thou shalt do no murder, thou shalt not kill. But that was written long before nuclear weapons, and we have to think very carefully about how the sacredness of human life is to be upheld in the age of nuclear weapons. How can nuclear weapons ever be allowed if we hold all human life to be sacred? And so on. Now, I think the centrality of law as part of our Catholic life is very important. He gave a law, the law on Mount Sinai, which will never pass away. That law is a sign of God's love to us. We want to keep that law. Take care as you value your lives, continues Moses, verse 9, chapter 4. Do not forget the things you have seen, or let them slip from your heart as long as you live. Teach them rather to your children, to your children's children. That, of course, is a very beautiful phrase. Take care, keep on remembering. Our Catholic life is largely about remembering. Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. And it's also about teaching the future generations. It's about tradition. So we've got law, and along with law comes tradition. Why do we keep these laws? Because they've been handed down to us by our ancestors. And that's the sort of an answer a rabbi would give, I think. You know, what the tradition of the ancestors is something to be valued and something to be preserved. So let's not hear anything bad about tradition. Okay, that's the first discourse of Moses. See, I haven't talked about it all, but I've gone on long enough. I might say a bit more about it later. Bye for now.